The wait is finally over. We finally have some concrete details about the upcoming DLC for The Last Spell, and we're going to delve into everything we could find in the trailer video, as well as all of the information that has been shared by the developer. So without any further ado, it's time to talk about the Dwarves of Runenberg expansion for The Last Spell. First of all, what's in the DLC? There's a new map called Runenberg. There is a new race, which is a completely new system to The Last Spell, the idea of races, and they are the Dwarves. There are 3 new weapons, the cannon, the gauntlets, and the war shield. There are 2 new types of trinkets, it appears, both stone medals and old medals. We'll talk about both and the subtle differences between them. And then there will also be a free update coming to the game that will contain some additional improvements that are not part of the DLC expansion. I'm thrilled to see them doing this. I think that this is such an amazing practice. It's one that the developer of RimWorld does, where you give everyone a little bit of free stuff, and then the people who are really diehard into the game get to support the continued development of the core game by buying DLCs. All of this is going to be coming to us in a short 2 weeks on April 24th, but let's dive into everything we know. First and foremost, the map is Runenberg. Runenberg is going to be an 8-night, so on the shorter end, comparable to Glenwall. There are going to be these environmental trap type things called runestones that you will be able to do damage to, activate them, and they will do some type of area effect type of thing. Every night they will respawn apparently in the same location, so they're kind of like a resource that you can utilize when things get particularly tough to get that little bit of extra damage or a debuff or some poison. There are also 4 dwarves statues or dwarven statues. I think the literature calls them dwarves statues that are both the boss but also a element of the map itself. You're guaranteed to have 1 dwarf on your team when you start Runenberg. The small harpies are back. The trailer shows a combination of footage from Gildenberg and from the new Runenberg location, but I double checked and there's at least 1 scene that has a dwarf statue and a harpy in the same space, so I think the harpies are getting the full treatment and returning. The boss of this map is going to be the statues themselves, which are going to do some type of like AoE buff. It's very reminiscent of the buff that the light side boss uses on the final map, Glintfine. No more spoilers than that, but basically it's going to be doing an AoE effect buff. One side of this map is going to be randomly generated on a per run basis, so it won't change throughout the course of the nights like Glintfine, but it will give us this kind of like slight increase in dynamism. And then last but not least, it is targeted at the after Glenwald, before Elderlicht difficulty space, which I think is a really nice sweet spot because I think that we needed some ramping difficulty between the two. Glenwall is relatively easy, and then you hit Elderlicht and things get really hard. One thing that I want to mention here, because I think that it's what has gotten me most excited about this, is that they seem to be introducing a lot of thematic things that can be built on top of. The thing here that I wanted to call out was the one side being randomly generated per run. I think the idea of moving towards more procedural maps and more variants is going to give a lot more replayability to the game. And in the same vein, I think this idea of having a new race and having races be an element of the game is something that they can expand on significantly in the future. Makes me very excited about what is to come. But moving on, this is Runenberg in a nutshell. There's a few features that I'll kind of point out in future slides, but some interesting things. It is the first haven that has empty tiles in it, essentially like ravines that you have to cross. There's that interesting dashed line on the right-hand side, and then the western, I guess, corner has that little like comma-shaped cutout in it. Looks like we're gonna have plenty of 4 ruins, and the only other thing of note is that the way that the haven is set up is kind of interesting. There's 2 3x3 cutouts on the southeastern face of the map, which I think is very interesting. In terms of like the story, the way that they're describing it right now is that that southeastern corner is kind of like the bridge that people would be entering in from. And there's going to be some elements of the story that go around that. And then there are essentially 4 dwarven statues, which we'll call out in a second here. But let's talk about them first. So the dwarven statues appear to be inactive until the final night. That's not confirmed, but that's the way that they were described. And then on the final night, they're going to be creating these massive diamond buffs. They're going to be 11 on their longest edge, 11 tiles, basically a middle tile and then 5 in each direction. And they're going to be apparently perfect diamonds. They have a nice effect that goes along with them. We'll check out in a second. And the 2 that we saw is +1 movement and +60% damage, which is a pretty substantial buff. And then also plus 150 armor. You can see why I'm drawing some comparisons to the way that Glintfine operates. Also, the buff is not centered around the dwarven statues. I haven't shown you where those are yet, but it is a targeted buff that will apparently target a particular enemy or cluster of enemies. So let's talk about the dwarven statues. The active form is in that little dark box, but there are 4 of them located. 2 of them are relatively near your base. 1 of them is particularly far from your base. So the 2 close ones appear to be about 2 to 3 tiles outside, and then the further ones are more like 5 or 6 tiles. I think they are statically located. We don't have any confirmation, but as we discussed before, they're going to get angry at some point on the final night, and they're going to do some stuff. That stuff looks like this. This is that 11 across diagonal buff that I was describing before, and these are the 2 versions that we've been shown, which is the plus movement and damage or the plus armor version. So the other feature of the map that we have to talk about is runestones. And runestones feel a little bit like mist sensors, but they're essentially environmental traps. And what that means is they are something that you as the player can activate. And when you activate them, they're going to do some type of area effect. The 2 that we've seen, 2 of them that we've seen are 5x5. The poison and the ice appears to be 5x5. And the fire appears to be a 3x3, but we need confirmation on all these things. It's kind of hard to see from the video. The runestones appear to have 100 health. Once they take 100 damage, they are going to explode. My current hypothesis is that ice will be a movement debuff, potentially a snare, to 25 enemies, or as many as, I guess, 24 enemies. Then poison, at least in the screenshot, I'll show you, I think I have a screenshot from the video on the next slide, but the short version is that poison looks like it's a very small amount of poison. It hits a boomer and it's a barely visible, like 1 pixel line. That may just be from the tuning phases, and that may change up. And then fire appears to be a smaller detonation. But these are going to be, I think, procedurally placed on the map in random locations, kind of like the mist sensors. But once they are in a location every night of your campaign, they are apparently going to respawn in the same areas. Poison also appears to have no direct damage component, whereas ice and fire do. And other than that, they have also suggested that on the final night, there are also going to be corrupted versions of the runestones that you may have to avoid as the player. So, speaking of runestones, on the map that they show us, this is where the runestones are. Interestingly, one thing that I noticed is it does not appear that the runestones are ever on the bridge side, but that needs to be confirmed. One thing that's curious is the one that's kind of close to my head. Let me see if I can point to it up. I'm all mirrored up. So if I put my finger here and I point down like this, that one there is right next to the base. It's like 2 tiles away. So hopefully we know that when they explode, they don't do damage to heroes. Hopefully they also don't do damage to walls. But those are runestones. They're going to be located around the map and potentially going to be something that we can trigger to give us a little extra oomph if we need it. Now on to the specific runestones. When we saw them, this is where you see that boomer that I was talking about on the left-hand side. It looks like it might have taken 11 damage and a tiny, tiny amount of poison. It's hard to see, but you can see the 5x5 grid on that right-hand image. The ice runestone, they give us a nice, pretty view of. Incidentally, it is a hero using the cannon ability and blowing up a runestone. And there's a 3x3 effect from the cannon, but then a 5x5 effect from the ice. And the enemies are left with a debuff, and you do see the -2 movement showing up on them. So I think that confirms that it is a snare. I think I said maybe, but it's definitely that. Then last but not least, they do appear to show us the fire runestone also. It is detonated by a gauntlet in what appears to be like 3 fists kind of charging forward, but it appears to hit in a 3x3 region rather than the larger 5x5 region, and it looks like it's doing about 3 to 450 damage, which is nothing to sneeze at. And in fact, with the armor damage there, maybe it's closer to 500, but it looks like the fire runestone is going to be your biggest direct damage attack from the runestones, whereas ice is going to be more of a debuff and poison is going to be obviously poison. I would have loved to have seen contagion show up on the poison one, but from what we could see going back here for a second, I don't see the contagion buff showing up, but I think that would have been a really cool potential change. But that is only one small bit. That's just the map. The next thing we have to talk about is the new race of dwarves. Dwarves are going to have a exclusive perk column, which is going to replace one of the bag or miscellaneous perk columns that we have currently. The race is going to have adjusted baseline statistics. Dwarves have less movement, more block, and more daily health regen. One thing that I am not sure of is if the, say, minus movement affects the min and max, or just affects the overall movement for that hero. AKA, does a dwarf still cap out at the same amount of movement, or can they get 2 less movement, AKA only 15? But as an homage to Lord of the Rings, dwarves are tossable, so other companions will be able to throw your dwarves to make up for a bit of that movement penalty. They should be available in the inn with the same frequency as humans, so you'll be seeing lots of them in the inn. And they do have some unique toasts that we saw, one of which is, "I think I'm not drunk enough for this," which is relatable at times when it comes to some of the hordes that we fight in the last spell. But dwarves seem very interesting. I love this mechanic because of the design possibilities that it opens up. As for the dwarven perk column, it looks like you see on the left there, but doing some quick searches or doing some quick looking at what we have to see, it appears that much like every other perk slot, there are probably going to be 2 perks that can fit into each of these tiers. We specifically know that because Carnage is the other tier 2, and it has a different icon than the tier 2 that's shown in this screenshot. So presumably there are at least 2 tier 2s. In terms of perks that we know about so far, we only got to see a small fraction of them, but Warcry is going to be some type of, I think, AoE buff based on the injury of the buff giver. So a injured dwarf will be able to pass some amount of damage over to other heroes. Then we have Look at My Muscles, which is a chest slot disabled for 3 AP perk. I think that's really interesting. I think that one might get some play because I think 3 AP is pretty awesome. But losing that defensive stat block from chest armor, we know to be really difficult. Emergency Tunnel is potentially going to be the best dwarf ability out there. It is a 3-mana teleport to any haven tile. I am not sure if you can do it when you are in the haven. We're going to need to check that out in the future, but just that level of mobility inside the haven, assuming they don't tune corpse piles, is going to mean that you're going to have dwarves are going to be supremely good at defending the base because of that simplicity and mobility. Then we have Carnage, which is when you hit 5 enemies, gain 1 move and 10% damage for 2 turns, which if this works with multi-hit and you can get your multi-hit above 5, could be absolutely staggeringly broken. If it only works on AoEs and only works on AoEs that have to hit 5 enemies, it's going to be a little more limited, but you can still roll a ton of damage and a ton of move. For a tier 2 perk, Carnage looks very, very strong. Next up, we need to talk about the weapons. The first thing to note is weapons can now have perks. This is a change that I hope we see echo through the rest of the weapons, because I think it gives a lot more identity to weapons. But basically, each weapon has some special feature that can only be gotten from that weapon. As an example, the gauntlets have some type of evolution mechanic where after you do a certain number of things, they're going to transform into a ranged weapon, which I think is interesting. I'm not sure if that's a per night transformation or how that's necessarily going to work. Then we have War Shield, which is going to increase your damage significantly based on the damage that you take or the hits that you take. And then we're going to have Cannon, which appears to be a very, very strong two-handed ranged weapon that's going to have a variable AP cost based on like an overheat mechanic. So if you use it too much, it's going to start getting weaker. To delve into these specifically, though, because we see each of them used in some form. The Gauntlet is the first one. We know it to be a one-handed weapon. Like I mentioned before, it has this transform effect. It appears to have a propagation attack. I'm really hoping that that is its primary attack. Like its one slot attack being a propagation attack, I think would be so good for the game because it would be a balance to the hand crossbows primary attack being multi-hit. I think each propagation and multi-hit should have a baseline no mana weapon that utilizes them. And then it also appears to have some type of point blank, like multi-punch 3-column attack, forward attack. That one was a little hard to capture because it got mixed up with the fire runestone exploding. But Gauntlet seems like it has some interesting play. The range transformation going to be very interesting to see how that kind of manifests. Next up, we have War Shield, which is a two-handed weapon, but it is a weapon, not a shield slot item. It has 4 abilities. We see the most of it. Its main attack appears to be not range modifiable and a little U-shape attack. And then it allows you, through that weapon perk, to get up to a plus 60% damage increase by taking hits. So much like Spiky Counter, if you're taking a bunch of hits, you can stack up to 60% damage. But every time you spend an action point or every time you take a turn and do not get hit, you're potentially going to regress on that, a la 1x1. Very interesting. I think this has a lot of potential. It'll be really cool to see if this plus Spiky Counter plus defensive builds can start to pick up some steam. We haven't seen all of the abilities. I'd love also to see some abilities that scale off of block. I think that would be really cool. It's clear that they come with block as one of their options. Last but not least, we have the two-handed cannon, which has the overheat mechanic we talked about before. So it's going to have some, you overuse it, it becomes weaker type of thing. It is a two-handed weapon, and as is an example from this shot from it being used in Gildenberg, it has at least one attack that can have up to 13 targets of multi-hit. We counted them up. There's a 2 in there as well. I thought it was only 12, but it's actually 13. But it does appear that it might have random targeting. Based on the fact that sometimes there were things that were targeted that don't seem to be getting hit or vice versa. I think randomness and targeting could be really fun. This is something that I wanted to introduce with the lightning bolt on the Tome of Magic mod that I did. But then the other improvement or the other ability that the cannon has appears to be a rocket jump that has some mobility, and when you land, you stun. Think of it a lot like the leap from the Great Axe. Overall, the cannon looks supremely powerful, but that downside of overheating could make it difficult or unwieldy from time to time. Next up, there's this new item that they talk about, which is medals. And there appear to be 2 types of medals. They talk about one in the context of the free update and the other in terms of the DLC. Stone medals appear to be the DLC specific trinkets that give some type of unique perk not gotten anywhere else. They're bought from the store, they come from corpse piles, but they will give your hero some perk that may grant an ability or grant some type of, standard perk enhancement, and they appear to go in the trinket slot. I don't think we had anything to indicate that there's a new slot for medals. That could be kind of interesting to play with. But the other type of medal that they've talked about are old medals, and those will be coming to everyone who owns the base game. And old medals are going to contain perks that already exist. So you can imagine there might be a world in which you have the perfect Blood Mage build, but you need an old medal that has Blood Mage on it in order to complete it because your hero didn't roll Blood Mage. So I think that's really interesting. I think it opens up some interesting opportunities to get your spiky counter and bodybuilder on the same hero if they allow you to kind of double dip in that regard. But only time will tell on medals. I think it's a really neat design space to allow heroes to have new ways of getting medals without. Also, if the gear level is tied to the medal perk level, and that means level 5 gear is going to give you level 5 perks, that could open up some really interesting options and power levels as well. So the last thing to talk about here is the free update. So as I mentioned before, and I think this is probably like the most exciting part of this whole announcement, they are going to be improving the base game for people who already own it. So even if you don't buy the DLC, you're going to be getting some cool stuff. The first thing that they pointed out was per run weapon customization. Basically, you can select a minimum of 4 of each weapon type for any given run. So if you really never want to see a two-handed sword, this is the improvement for you. I think this is really great. It's a lot like a mod that my community has been using and I've been using on runs substantially that allowed you to kind of like tweak what weapons would show up and what weapons shouldn't show up. As we'll see in the screenshot, there's a boundless mode, which indicates that you can probably limit it down to 1 weapon if you want to do certain challenge weapons, which is very exciting. Then old medals, which we talked about before, will also be coming as part of the free update. And there's more that we are not going to know about probably until the launch, but I'm hoping to see bug fixes. I'm hoping to see some other quality of life improvements. But I mean, I'd honestly be happy if just console players got corpses the way that everyone else has them. Which, as a side note, they haven't talked about it here, but I'm hoping to see some balance changes. I'd love to see them do a bit of a finishing pass on a few things that didn't quite live up to expectations. Maybe nerf some things that are a little too strong, change the way that ballistas work. There's a lot of things that they could do that would be really fantastic for the base game. Speaking of the weapon selection screen, this is what it looks like. You can select or restrict certain weapons from showing up or not showing up, which I think is really cool. And presumably that boundless mode icon in the upper left indicates that maybe you can defy the limits that are placed in the top center of the screen. But that is what we know so far. So in summary, and to give a little bit of a value judgment by me, I'm super excited. I think that this is an amazing start. I have wanted a content drip of last spell stuff for a while, and if this is indicative of something that they can do on a slightly more regular cadence, hopefully not once a year, I think it would be absolutely fantastic. I love the way that they're incorporating systems that look like they have the ability to be built upon, grown, improved. Over time, that would be fantastic to see. We don't know what the state of modding when this DLC is released is going to be, but I'm hoping that maybe they make modding just a little bit easier than it is currently. But overall, I'm thrilled. I think that adding a free upgrade is S+ tier, in my opinion. Always give back to the people that have already supported you, and then let the people who are truly passionate about it buy the DLC and fund continued development. The map difficulty looks like it's right on point. Like I said, Glenwall to Elderlicht felt like a big jump. I think that it's fantastic to have a map in the middle that hopefully nestles in that mid-range, gives you a bigger challenge than Glenwall, but isn't quite on the insane Elderlicht level. Mechanics of the map, we don't know what to think so far, but I'm presuming that it's going to be pretty cool. It certainly has a cool look, and I love the lore of underneath Gildenberg. There's this like secret hidden dwarven fortress of Vior type of thing. Dwarves seem fun. It seems like just a great system. I want to see more races. One thing that I mentioned a little further down is I would have loved to see them make humans similarly first class. So create a perk tree for humans. Humans have some stuff. Dwarves have some stuff. And then as they add more people, if they add lizard folk, they can add a column for them. It's a nice extensible system that I just want to see more and more and more of. As for weapons, they look interesting. The devil is always in the details. I don't know what I would have thought of Sword Blast had I not seen it firsthand versus seen it in a trailer, but just hard to know overall. But the cannon looks like it's in a really interesting design space, and the shield has huge potential to open up some new defensive builds potentially that could be really fun. And then last but not least, I think medals are a great idea. I think that having another way to get perks is cool, and it enables builds that previously were limited by mutual exclusivity. It allows you to kind of say, well, maybe I can make this a momentum hero even though I don't have boom, because I can get it from a metal depending on their frequency and how easy they are to acquire. But overall, I think this update looks really good. I'm thrilled by the changes that we've seen here, and I can't believe that it's coming in a mere 2 weeks. So keep an eye on the channel for lots more content to come, but we will be playing the last spell like crazy upon release on stream. And so come hang out in the meantime, or join us when that happens. But for now, this has been your update on the last spell. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next time when I have more things to report. Bye.